say that from a creative storytelling point, this continues to be a very interesting show, and there are a lot of interesting developments with this latest episode. But when you put your business hat on, I feel that this show is just not doing it. And I think one of the best pieces of evidence of that is that HBO did not release the viewership numbers for the second episode after having to admit that viewership had dropped with the premiere. We'll see if they report numbers ever again, because I don't think this episode's going to bring up increase viewership. I have a feeling that maybe episode 4 might, which we'll discuss. No spoilers. I haven't seen it. I get these episodes only a couple of days before you do. But yeah, when you put your business hat on, I'm like, you guys are not doing it. And in that context, I want to talk about that scene. Because from a business perspective, I think it's social media bait, pretty clearly. But I think creatively, it's a scene about shame. So that totally cancels out any benefit it would have had otherwise on social media. Because how do you share an image like that? Which I think, I don't think the scene was very well done, but one thing that they did get across was, how horrible Aemond felt. I felt awful for him. I also kind of felt awful for the actor. I wonder how you and Mitchell felt about that scene when he read it and was asked to do it. So let's talk about that particular scene first. I thought for sure that they were going to cut away at just the last second as he turned around. Because let's be honest, up until this point, House of the Dragon has not been that kind of show. And been fine for it. It hasn't needed to be. Even Game of Thrones towards the end wasn't that kind of show, because it got called out for that kind of content. So when the camera did not cut away, I had 2 immediate reactions, and I'm curious how you reacted. On the one hand, I was like, House of the Dragon is trying and failing, in my opinion, to do a Game of Thrones style moment. And 2, as I said, I hope you and Mitchell was okay with doing this scene. And I think one of the reasons that I felt that way was, as I said, because the scene is about Aemond feeling ashamed. So you feel shame watching it. And that's not how Game of Thrones started out in its early days. It reveled in its debauchery. So much so, you might recall this, back in 2013, during the early days of Game of Thrones, there was a comedy sketch that went viral with actors explaining their lurid scenes to friends and family who were aghast, until it was revealed that this was not an adult film, but the prestigious HBO. So suddenly, family and friends were thrilled to hear that their loved ones who'd gone into the acting business were basically doing adult film scenes, but for HBO. Very funny comedy sketch. It cut to the core and actually had an effect on Game of Thrones content after that. Now, it's no secret that sexiness is an important part of showbiz, but there's a balance. And can Hollywood take it too far? Can HBO take it too far? Aemond was already a fan favorite, and this scene, I think, still would have worked if it had cut away at the last second and then used discrete camera framing. As Hollywood balances the scales between men and women when it comes to on-screen exposure. That was another criticism of Game of Thrones in its early days, that it was mostly women on display and not the male characters. More and more men have had partial and full scenes in movies and TV. A lot of it very tastefully and effectively and understandably done from a creative perspective. So what's the issue with this scene, if you have one? Some of you might feel it was well done. I think, again, it's the context of the scene, that it's a scene about shame. But, and you might say, well, then it's very effective in that regard. But I don't think that the scene was well done. I think it was too short. I think we haven't spent enough time with Aemond. I guess I feel like they didn't earn this scene, writing-wise or character-wise. What do we really know about the guy besides he looks cool and he's a huge Daemon stan? I think that, again, not having earned this scene is a good way to put it, And then also, it just reeks of the business decision of, it's a viral moment. And you're like, but is it? I think you don't understand. And I think you ended up making like a big mistake. So again, we'll see how everybody reacts to it. But that was my reaction. That's one of the things of watching these episodes early. You're not in the moment with the general fandom, the overall fandom when it happens. So, that could change the context. We'll see. All right, so now we're 3 episodes into season 2 of House of the Dragon, a season which, by the way, is only 8 episodes instead of last season's 10 episodes. And they still haven't had a really banger moment. I mean, at least the first 2 episodes had really strong endings. But even then, I don't think they were moments that set the internet again on fire, which Game of Thrones, of course, they established that formula for event television. I think maybe some shows have done it in the past, but I don't think anyone has done it as consistently as Game of Thrones did when it was peak Game of Thrones. And as I said, it's, I think, telling that we have not had any updated viewership numbers for this season. Now, I know some of you have been like, man, you guys don't appreciate a slow burn, Philistines. But how do you feel now that we're 3 episodes in and it's still pretty slow? One problem that I think became very apparent this episode is that House of the Dragon has way too many inconsequential characters watering down the story. I know when talking about succession and royal power, family trees are important. But to hear about them in exhaustive detail in dialogue only with no visuals to support it, I mean, I know they can't. Why not take out a chart? But they could at least maybe have some cutaways. I mean, and many of these characters we've never even seen, or we only see the back of their heads, and they just talk about them so much, and it takes up so much screen time. And then you kind of check out because you're like, dude, I don't even know who you're talking about, right? But one mention that got Game of Thrones fans' hearts aflutter last week was that Viserys and Alicent's third son from the books, Daemon Targaryen, these names are all the same. It's like Daemon, but like Daemon. He exists in the world of the show. Because last week, when the first Otto Hightower muses that he'll go back home and spend time with the rest of his family, that includes his third grandson, who he's like, maybe he's not as dumb as Aegon and even Aemond. He's like, I'll try with that one. Daemon in the books is said to not only be the kindest of Alicent's 3 sons with Viserys. Is he like a mini Viserys? Wouldn't that be wonderful? I said last week that this show was missing the Starks, a family that you could relate to, a compassionate, kind character. And I do think that Viserys very much ended up filling that role, last season. He was in some ways maybe kind of like the Jon Snow. I mean, he was such a kind person. And so, it would be wonderful if we had a little mini Viserys running around in Daemon. But apparently, he's also got a blue dragon who breathes blue fire. When can he show up? Oh, I'm excited. So, of course, imagine the disappointment when another guy from Alicent and Otto's home shows up, her douche brother, Gwayne. What's this asshole doing here? I think clearly he's there to take some of the heat off of Sir Criston Cole. Uncool that people went over to that actor's Instagram page and harassed him. I don't understand what makes somebody be upset with something that's fictional happening on a show and go and harass the talent behind it. Especially the actors. They are not in charge of that. They're playing a role. If you're unhappy about something, talk to the show. Even then you should still be respectful. But this is a new part of fandom that I think is bizarre. All right. So anyway, so I don't think you can take any heat off of Sir Criston Cole, who, by the way, did you catch his new look, new job, new haircut? Who dis? He looks even more of a jerk. But, I'm not upset with the actor about it. I just don't like Sir Criston Cole. He has got his new armor, which is, of course, overly ornate. He's flushing the Kingsguard down the toilet, which we're going to talk about. But as for Gwayne, not a huge character in the book, so it will be interesting to see what House of the Dragon has planned for him. Besides, maybe he's just there, as I said, to take some of the heat off Cole. You think this guy's a jerk? Look at this one. And you're like, I just see 2 jerks. There was the whole dragon fiasco that comes out of their, misunderstanding. Gwayne's like, I ain't camping on the ground. But anyway, he's like, I'm going to an inn. And you're like, medieval times, is it really that much better? All right, so anyway, they had that whole dragon fiasco, which I think would have been cooler if it hadn't seemed so overtly CGI and if something had actually happened. I would have burned that forest to the ground. Whatever. I think medieval the Environmental Protection Agency, well, actually, the Supreme Court just gutted whatever. Whatever, man. Whatever. I'm burning that forest to the ground. I'm going to smoke those guys out. All right, so anyway, I gotta say, for a show that's based on the Dance of the Dragons, great title, how are they still basically doing stretches and warm-ups this far into season 2? They're, the dragon's like, are we going to do it now? How about now? Nope. Still at the warm-up bar. Although it was pretty funny when Aegon, after talking to Larys Strong, decided not to join Cole on his own dragon after all, and his lackeys quickly changed their minds to back him up. He's like, I thought maybe actually I won't go out today. And they're like, oh yeah. It was very funny. It almost turned into minions right before our eyes. Although speaking of the Kingsguard, when even Aegon is shocked at the current substandards of the group, it's pretty bad. Cole's the head of that, right? He doesn't respect his vows, so why should any of his men? They clearly have a hiring problem, although maybe nobody wants to be in the Kingsguard right now. What's the pay package like? But I thought it was hilarious when Aegon was like, aren't you guys supposed to be celibate? And then they laughed, and then they were like, oh yeah. But then Aegon just went along with it, because, leadership sucks across the board. I hope that with the telling shots of Rhaenys, who is growing wary and worried, that her big dragon battle is coming up very soon, hopefully next episode. So I think the show is, telegraphing its next moves a little bit. And then I think something big is coming up for Rhaenys. Again, as I said, hopefully next episode. Now, on that note, in the books, she clashes with Cole and his forces at Rook's Rest. However, here on the show, Cole marches on Harrenhal. And if you look at this map from the books, to go to Rook's Rest would be out of the way. I don't know if this is the map in the show. Maybe Gwayne's like, I really need to stop somewhere. And so Rook's Rest is the ye old, pit stop on the way to Harrenhal. But Cole is marching on Harrenhal, where, what do you know, Daemon just arrived. Daemon's big battle, by the way, his big dragon battle takes place over Harrenhal, battle above the God's Eye. So is this show going to combine Rook's Rest and the battle above God's Eye into one big battle? Because are you going to have two battles at Harrenhal? I don't care at this point. Just give me a dragon battle. Anyway, is Harrenhal cursed? Sure looks like it. This is the castle, remember, that Larys Strong burned to the ground with his own father and brother inside. The brother who was the secret, not so secret father of Rhaenyra's sons. These scenes were interesting as Daemon, in full armor, goes through the castle in a very atmospheric, haunted medieval story kind of way, particularly reminiscent, I think, of animation, like The Black Cauldron, or even in some ways, Dragon's Lair. And Dragon's Lair. Speaking of beautiful blondes, Millie Alcock shows up for the briefest of cameos. It was ridiculously brief. I hope he has more hallucinations, because otherwise, why bring her to set and dress her up for just that quick little shot? But during his hallucination, clearly, either he feels worse about what happened than we thought, or more likely, he's just really feeling bad that his plans aren't appreciated, and even worse, get him into trouble. Like, he wasn't thinking about that young prince being upset or anything. He was upset that Rhaenyra was upset with him. But which version of Rhaenyra does he hallucinate? The younger one, who looked up to him and still thought he was cool. Very telling. I thought that was interesting. I think in many ways their relationship is still stuck in that time period. And we don't see a different Daemon because they didn't recast that actor. All right, which also is very telling of gender politics and society. All right. I think this cameo would have made more of an impact, again, if it were longer. Again, I don't think this cameo was earned. And if Daemon wasn't stuck in such a rut as the character. It is interesting that when Daemon snaps out of his hallucination, he's outside, and not just anywhere outside, but standing in front of the weirwood tree on the Harrenhal property. And those trees, of course, are tied to the mystical elements of Game of Thrones. And on that note, someone is waiting for him. One of our favorite actresses from Glow. I'm so happy to see her continue to get more work. She's doing better than the two leads on that show. What a great show. Everybody on that show should be getting work. I loved Glow. But anyway, she's standing there waiting for him, and she says, she tells him that he's going to die here at Harrenhal. Ooh, Daemon, you would think Daemon would leave, but he can't, because he's in the middle of Mr. Targaryen builds his dream house. It was very Daemon to see him still trying to be this great figure in the face of reality. From the keeper of Harrenhal, the current keeper of Harrenhal, continually calling him a prince instead of a king. And that right there just shows a real lack of respect, because how do you make that mistake more than once? Daemon doesn't kill him. Daemon's already in a lot of trouble. Although who would really be paying attention to what happens here at Harrenhal? I guess Daemon's trying to be on his best behavior. But wow, that was really insulting that that guy kept calling him prince instead of king. Like, it was bad. I think people might, in medieval times, people might have allowed Daemon to do at least a little something about that. But I also liked his contractor-style discussions on what it would take to fix up Harrenhal. Daemon, it's clearly a teardown. It's so a teardown. But you know what else it is? He and Rhaenyra are clearly on the outs, right? And he needs a new seat of power to maintain his dignity. Just like a divorced dad. Because I think Harrenhal is giving off major divorced dad's new apartment vibes. I mean, when you think of it that way, it's just perfect. I love that. A lot of talking this episode, with both Alicent and Rhaenyra stuck on councils full of men who love to hear themselves talk and don't like to hear women talk. With both Alicent and Rhaenyra largely being ignored. And Rhaenyra's being ignored by her own council. I loved when she said, you're basically all trying to stage a coup, and you're lucky you didn't take it any further than suggesting it at this table. But I think, what could she really do about it? Because clearly everybody who works for her was in on it. And that's pretty bad. What would you have done if you were Rhaenyra? I might have just killed everybody at that table. Oopsie, we'll have to start again. I mean, she's not even listening to their advice. Just to be like, it was a horrible accident. Those greens, a green snuck in here. Nobody knows what happened with that twin. He went berserk and he killed everybody before we got him. Thanks, Greens, for sending over an excuse. All right. That's what this decisive action. All right, now Alicent has no female friends, the situation much of her own making. She cast off her BFF Rhaenyra, right? And has a strained relationship with her own children, including her daughter. Her exchange with Helaena this episode was extremely well done, with Helaena saying she forgives her mother, and you can tell Helaena is talking about a lot more than just what recently happened to her son. Like Otto, Alicent has used her own daughter as a piece on the board, but unlike Otto, Alicent has not encouraged her daughter to play the game herself. I mean, Helaena is definitely a very unique individual, but she clearly has hidden depths and insight. Many of you believe she has mystical abilities. She can predict the future. Well, she can see the future, but she's having a very hard time understanding what she's seeing. There's clearly something there, and Alicent has made no effort to understand it or, use it herself or allow Helaena to use it. So she really let her daughter down in that regard. I think that I was on Helena's side in this conversation. And speaking of Helaena, it was very sad to hear Helena's justification for her son's murder, saying that people die all the time in medieval times, especially children, so why not hers? Well, where's the court therapist? There isn't one, but there is a master of whisperers, with Aegon appointing Larys Strong. He's like, I already was the master of whisperers, but I guess now it's official. But unofficially, speaking of unofficial master of whisperers, Mysaria has come to fill that role for Rhaenyra, and incredibly well. I'd be like, Rhaenyra wins the master. I like Larys Strong. He's a great creepy character. But I really like Mysaria. I love Mysaria, in fact. Not much of a character during the first season, but wow. One of my favorite things this season has been seeing Rhaenyra and Mysaria come to respect each other, right? Like what we'd hoped maybe for Rhaenyra and Alicent. But Mysaria is much smarter than Alicent. But anyway, to see Rhaenyra and Mysaria work together and be stronger for it. Mysaria's counsel this episode is fantastic. A true professional, she advises her queen, but then when the queen makes up her mind, Mysaria accepts it and finds a way to make it happen. And she does. She's extremely effective. Mysaria is a fantastic addition to Rhaenyra's team. Now, Rhaenys's advice is also welcome, as we see, and these two women are who are truly Rhaenyra's counsel. So again, I don't think she could have gotten rid of the rest of them. So Rhaenys counsels Rhaenyra to talk to Alicent, to try to avoid what will clearly be a devastating war for both sides. And Mysaria makes it happen. Wow, what a 1-2 punch. Thanks, ladies. With Rhaenyra sneaking into King's Landing, Daemon does it all the time, right? But Rhaenyra is smart enough to go along with a bodyguard. And sure enough, as I predicted just last week, these two women were on a collision course to reunite. However, no one could have predicted how stupid their conversation was. Maybe, to be fair, that might be one of the reasons that nobody's listening to either one of them. I mean, they are in charge, and they do sometimes make some good points, but neither one of them is a particularly good strategist. All right, so stop the fighting? Sure. Take Aegon off the throne and put another of Alicent's sons on there, like Aemond or Daemon? maybe Alicent could be talked into doing that. But that Rhaenyra thinks there would be any chance of the Hightowers completely giving up the throne is absolutely absurd. I mean, it was a ridiculous request. I loved Daemon sarcastically describing the throne, by the way. Big chair, lots of swords. But one of the great things about that conversation, that give and take, was that it makes the larger point that who really cares who sits on the throne except for a petty few? All this fighting, and yet all the options that are out there don't really make a big difference at the end of the day. Certainly not to the people. I think this episode was very much about the people. We're going to talk about that at the very end of this breakdown, but I don't think effectively so. All right, so Rhaenyra comes to Alicent with an impossible request. And then, to make matters even worse, their conversation reveals that this entire war has been started over a misunderstanding. Whoopsie! That Alicent misinterpreted her dying husband's last words. I mean, Alicent isn't getting any respect as it is. Does Rhaenyra really think she's going to waltz in there and go, guess what, guys? Funny story! And undercut her son's claim to the throne, which, by the way, is legitimate because they are Viserys' children as well. I mean, it's not that far-fetched that they would have, they could also take over the throne. So there's no way that Alicent is going to admit that. Not only for the sake of her family, but for the sake of herself. And as for any chance of peace, which I guess, I think this conversation, this give and take is about, on the surface, it's about trying to have peace. But it's really about two people that they won't budge. And I can understand why neither one of them would budge, to be honest with you. It's just it's Succession. This House of the Dragon really just is Succession, but the genre version of it. And I wonder why that's why the ratings might be a little bit lower, because Succession, while a very lauded, talked about show, certainly never had the ratings of Game of Thrones. That's funny. All right. So anyway, Alicent points out that her father is now gone from court, and he was the only one who would maybe consider diplomacy over war. So it's simply too late. And I think from the other side, now that Rhaenyra knows for sure, before she wasn't sure if her father changed his mind at the last minute, but now she knows that he didn't. So that's only going to strengthen her resolve on her side. And I guess Alicent is not going to want to be embarrassed. So this, that's what the only place left to go is a big dragon battle. Let's do it, baby. And the season desperately needs it. There are rumors that episode 4 is going to finally deliver in that regard. And I hope for the sake of this show and for us that those rumors are true. So finally, there's this new dude who claims to be an illegitimate Targaryen, with therefore a claim to the throne. But right now, he's backing Rhaenyra, and not even saying that she's the true person who should be on the throne, though. But her son, I'm like, how do we just skip over Rhaenyra? What the heck? That's something Rhaenyra should be a little bit concerned about. I'm like, everybody's fighting, but is everybody on the same page? If your team wins, are you going to be the one who sits on the throne, or are they just going to skip immediately to your son? All right, so part of me wonders if this character is filling the role of Hugh the Hammer, rather than the blacksmith character we've already met, who is named Hugh, but doesn't act very hammery. Or maybe it's just a commentary on how many illegitimate royal kids are running around, and that so many people have a claim to the throne. Or how different people in the land process the war between these two houses, right? Like the opening sequence, where we see two other houses who've hated each other for decades or millennia, just using the current conflict as an excuse to kill each other. Now, if that were the case, if they wanted to show, they've shown, micro and macro, right? I'm trying to use the terms. If they've only shown on House of the Dragon what this means. Wouldn't it be interesting if Succession, for instance, had shown what this means for shareholders at different levels? That would have been actually a very interesting episode. But, Succession was an incredible show. But House of the Dragon, not quite as steady. I think it doesn't quite know what it is this season. But it would have maybe been interesting and more Game of Thronesy to throw it out to the rest of, the world of the show and see how this conflict was affecting everybody else. But that would have had to have been the theme of the entire episode. He would have had to just totally leave King's Landing and Dragonstone, wherever Rhaenyra is, and focus on those places. So, but they only have 8 episodes. But let's just get to some dragon fighting. All right, so what did you think of House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 3? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.